They called him the Ghost of the West Side. The explosion took Arthur Cornero's sight, but he didn't lose his grip on the city's underworld. It made him colder, more ruthless. He ruled in total darkness. His men walked on eggshells. They were terrified that one wrong breath would trigger his wrath. Then came a girl from a temp agency who didn't know the rules. She didn't whisper. She didn't tremble. She simply marched into his office and asked if he took sugar. The waiting room smelled of expensive leather and cheap fear. Nora Hay sat there with an aggressively straight back. She stared at a spot on the carpet. She needed this job. Her bank account was overdrawn by $200. Her landlord had started leaving voicemails instead of texts, and she was currently surviving on saltines in spite. The heavy mahogany doors to the inner office clicked open. A woman in a tailored suit stormed out, and her face was blotchy and wet. She wasn't just crying. She was hyperventilating. She clutched a leather-bound notebook to her chest like a shield. She didn't look at Nora. She just ran for the elevator. Left behind was a faint trail of expensive perfume and panic. Next, the voice didn't come from the weeping woman, it came from the man, standing in the doorway. He was broad-shouldered and wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nora's car. His nose had been broken at least twice. He looked at Nora with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "Are you the girl from the agency?" he asked. "Nora," she said, standing up and smoothing the front of her thrifted blazer. "Yes," the man sighed. "I'm Vincent. I'm going to give you the same speech as the last four. Only speak when you are spoken to. Don't move anything on his desk. Do not touch him. If he asks you to read a document, read it exactly as it is printed. No summaries." Vincent paused and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "And don't patronize him. If you do, you won't just be fired." Nora nodded. She didn't ask what "won't just be fired" meant. She didn't care. How much was the pay again? Vincent blinked, surprised by the question. 40 an hour, double, for overtime. Great. Let's go. Vincent stepped aside and opened the heavy doors wider. The office beyond was huge, taking up the entire corner of the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a wide panoramic view of the city skyline. Steel and glass caught the late afternoon sun, but the heavy blackout curtains were drawn shut. The room was bathed in a suffocating, unnatural twilight. Behind a massive oak desk sat Arthur Cornero, or he was younger than the rumors made him out to be, perhaps in his early 30s. He had thick, dark hair and a strong jaw, covered by a light shadow of stubble. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal thick forearms with faded, sprawling tattoos. He was striking in a hard, angular way. A deeply angry red scar ran from his left temple down over his eyelid, ending at his cheekbone. His eyes were open, but they were milky, unfocused, dead. Nora stopped about a meter away from the desk. Vincent closed the doors behind her with a soft click, leaving her alone with the ghost of the West Side. Silence spread out. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind of heavy, expectant quiet that made the air in one's lungs feel thick. Arthur sat perfectly still, his head tilted slightly to the right. He was listening. "You're breathing loudly," Arthur said. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone. It didn't boom, but it demanded the attention of the entire room. "My septum is deviated," Nora replied in a flat voice. "And I walked up 3 flights of stairs because your elevator in the lobby's broken." Arthur's head snapped toward the sound of her voice. For a fraction of a second, Nora felt the instinct to step back. The intensity of his blind gaze was unsettling. He was used to people crumbling when he focused on them. "The last one cried because I asked her to describe the room," Arthur said, his voice laced with bored cruelty. "She told me it was very beautiful. I threw a glass against the wall. Then she cried. "I saw her leaving," Nora said. "She looked like she'd had a bad time." Arthur leaned back in his leather chair and crossed his arms over his chest. "Describe the room." Nora didn't hesitate. "It's depressing. You have a corner office with $1 million view of the skyline, and you've barricaded it like a doomsday bunker. The carpet is navy blue. The walls are paneled with some kind of dark wood, probably mahogany. It smells like stale coffee and cigars. There's a stain on the carpet near the door that looks suspiciously like bleach trying to cover up blood, and your desk is completely empty except for a braille watch and a stack of manila folders." A muscle twitched in Arthur's jaw. "You have a loose tongue." "I have $50 in my account and rent is due in 3 days," Nora corrected. "I can't afford the luxury of a loose tongue." "I just don't have the energy to tiptoe around you. Do you want me to read the folders or not?" Arthur was silent for a long time. His fingers tapped a slow, rhythmic beat on the leather armrest of his chair. "Read the red one first," he finally said. "They're all made of manila folder," Nora replied. "The top one." Nora stepped forward, took the top folder, and opened it. It was a list of names, addresses, and numbers that looked like cargo shipments. She began to read. She didn't stumble. She didn't soften her voice. She read the brutal, dry mechanics of a criminal empire with the same detached professionalism she would use to read a grocery list. When she was finished, she closed the folder. Next, Arthur leaned forward and rested his elbows on the desk. "You aren't afraid of me?" "I'm afraid of becoming homeless, Mr. Cornero," Nora said, placing the folder exactly back where she found it. "You're just a guy who needs someone to read his mail." Arthur's blind eyes remained fixed on her face. Then, ever so slightly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Make me a coffee, Nora. Black." On the 4th day, Nora understood why the turnover rate was so high. It wasn't just the danger. That was a constant, underlying thrum. It was Arthur. He was a man who had spent his entire life in absolute control, only to have his autonomy violently ripped away. He compensated for this by being a tyrant. He demanded perfection. He had fits of rage, though they were cold and quiet. He dropped things on purpose to see how quickly people scrambled to pick them up. He asked questions he already knew the answers to, just to see if his subordinates would lie. His men treated him like an unexploded bomb. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones. They never disagreed. They never corrected him. Nora did. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The office was suffocatingly quiet. Arthur was pacing behind his desk, counting his steps, hops. A habit she noticed when he was thinking. 14 steps to the wall. Turn around. 14 steps back. Read the weekly earnings from the dogs again, Arthur commanded, with his back to her. Nora sighed and opened the heavy ledger. She had already read it 3 times. "Arthur, the numbers haven't changed in the last 20 minutes. The yield has dropped by 12%. Reading it again won't magically put money back into the shipping containers." Arthur stopped pacing, back and forth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The silence stretched, tense and dangerous. Outside the heavy oak doors, Nora knew that Vincent and 2 other guards were standing post. If Arthur screamed, they would storm in. "What did you say?" Arthur asked quietly. "I said the numbers are the same," Nora replied, without looking up from the ledger. She reached for her lukewarm coffee. "You're obsessed. That's bad for your blood pressure." Arthur turned around slowly. "I didn't ask for medical advice. I asked you to read. And I'm telling you, it's a waste of my time and yours," Nora countered. "If you want to know why the yield dropped, maybe you should ask why the union rep at Pier 4 bought a brand new Mercedes last week. It's in the expense report you had me read yesterday." Arthur stood perfectly still. He processed the information. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. "Call Vincent in here." Nora picked up the desk phone receiver and pressed the intercom. "Pa, Vincent, he needs you." Vincent entered a moment later. His eyes darted between Arthur and Nora, assessing the threat level. "Boss, bring me the union rep from Pier 4, Arthur said, in a deadly voice. Don't let him stop at home first. Understood?" Vincent said. He cast a look at Nora, an expression of deep confusion on his face, before withdrawing from the room. As the door clicked shut, Arthur walked back to his desk. He reached out his hand. His hand touched the edge of the oak to get his bearings. Then he sat down. "You noticed the car," he said. "I read what's on the paper," Nora said. She closed the ledger. "You have a meeting with the Sullivan brothers in 20 minutes. You need to fix your tie. It's crooked." Arthur frowned. His hands went to his neck. He fumbled with the silk knot, pulled it the wrong way, and made it tighter. He let out a frustrated breath. His hands fell into his lap. It was a rare crack in his armor, a flash of the deep, suffocating helplessness he tried so hard to hide. Nora watched him for a second. The cynical part of her brain told her to look away. He was a mafia boss. He ordered people beaten, maybe worse. He wasn't her problem, but he also looked like a man drowning in a teacup. Nora stood up and walked around the desk. Arthur flinched slightly at the sound of her approaching footsteps. His chin lifted. "What are you doing?" he snapped, his voice sharp with defense. "Fixing you." "Hold still," Nora said. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't hesitate. She stepped into his personal space, close enough to smell the bergamot soap he used and the sharp scent of adrenaline coming off his skin. She reached out and took the silk tie into her hands. Arthur tensed stiffly, his breath hitching. No one touched him. Not unless it was calculated, careful, and accompanied by a warning. His hands hovered over the armrest, his knuckles white. Nora ignored his panic. She loosened the messy knot with quick, efficient movements. Her knuckles briefly brushed the warm skin of his neck. She didn't linger. She didn't treat him as if he were fragile. She simply tied a perfect Windsor knot, smoothed his shirt collar, and stepped back. "There, now you look intimidating again," she said casually, and walked to her seat. Arthur exhaled slowly. He reached up. His fingers stroked the perfectly tied knot. He didn't say thanks. He didn't say anything for a long time. "Nora," he said quietly, his blind eyes fixed in her general direction. "Yes, don't move my coffee cup again. It belongs on the right side of the phone." Nora looked at the cup she had mindlessly pushed to the left when she had tidied up earlier. She smiled just a little bit. "Noted, boss." The restaurant was in the basement of an unassuming building in Little Italy, a private room smelling of garlic, red wine, and old grudges. Nora sat on a hard wooden chair in the corner, a leather portfolio on her knees. In the middle of the room stood a round table. Arthur sat on one side, flanked by Vincent. Opposite them sat Leon, a Caporegime who controlled the gambling rings on the south side. Leon was a large, sweating man in a cheap suit with a nervous laugh. Nora had been working for Arthur for 3 weeks. She had learned the rhythm of his life. She knew he tapped his index finger when he lied, that he'd drank his coffee black because milk turned his stomach, and that he hated pity more than his enemies. Tonight was a meeting, a negotiation, over territories. "Arthur, come on," Leon said, spreading his hands wide. "We've known each other a long time. I'm telling you, the profits from the underground games have dried up. The police are doing raids. I can't give you the usual percentage this month." Arthur sat with his hands folded on the table. His blind eyes were fixed straight ahead. "The police don't do raids on the south side. Leon, the precinct captain, is on my payroll. It's the new recruits, Arthur. They don't know the arrangement yet. Leon lied smoothly. He leaned forward and rested his forearms on the table. From her corner, Nora watched Leon. She watched his hands. While he spoke, Leon inconspicuously pulled a folded piece of paper from his inner jacket pocket. He slid it across the table, not to Arthur, but toward Vincent. It was a quiet, deliberate movement, a bribe, a side deal, offered right in front of the blind boss. Vincent looked at the paper. His face was unreadable. He didn't touch it, but he didn't push it back either. Nora felt a wave of cold resentment. They were treating Arthur as if he wasn't even in the room, as if he were a piece of furniture they could maneuver around. Arthur, sensing the shift in the room's energy, tilted his head. What's wrong, Leon? You're breathing hard. Just stressed, Arthur. Like I said, the money just isn't there, Leon said, tapping his finger lightly on the table right next to the folded paper to signal Vincent to take it. Nora didn't think about protocol. She didn't care about the mob rules she was supposedly breaking. She simply stood up. Her chair scraped loudly across the wooden floor, an echo like a gunshot in the silent room. All three men flinched. Nora walked calmly to the table. She reached between Vincent and Leon, picked up the folded piece of paper, and opened it. It looks like the money is there, Leon, Nora said, in a dry, conversational voice. She looked at the numbers on the page. In fact, it looks like you're offering Vincent a 20% share in a second betting ring you're running out of a laundromat on 5th Street. Provided he keeps quiet about it. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Leon's face drained of all color. He looked from Nora to Arthur. Absolute panic gathered in his eyes. Vincent stiffened. His hand dropped to the holster at his waist, though it was unclear who he meant to aim at. Arthur didn't move, he didn't shout. Slowly, a terrifying, razor-thin smile spread across his face. Is that so, Nora? Arthur asked quietly. That's what the numbers say, Nora replied. She threw the paper into the center of the table. He's siphoning money from you and trying to buy off your second-in-command right under your nose. Arthur turned his head toward Leon. His dead, milky eyes suddenly seemed to drill straight through the man's skull. Leon, Arthur whispered. Arthur, I swear it's a misunderstanding, Leon stammered, pushing his chair back. Vincent, Arthur interrupted him. His voice dropped an octave. Take Leon into the back room. Have a talk with him about loyalty, Vincent. Vincent swallowed hard. Yes, boss. And if you ever hesitate to show me a piece of paper again, you'll be keeping him company permanently. Vincent nodded sharply, though Arthur couldn't see it. He grabbed Leon by the collar of his cheap suit and dragged him out of the room. The man's panicked apologies were cut short as the heavy door slammed shut. Silence descended upon the private dining room once more. Nora stood at the table. Her heart was beating a bit faster than normal. The adrenaline was finally catching up to her. She had essentially just signed a man's death warrant, but as she looked at Arthur, she felt no remorse. She felt tired. Arthur slowly reached out his hand, touching the table and finding the piece of paper Nora had thrown down. He picked it up and folded it between his fingers. You've overstepped your bounds, Arthur said. The anger was gone from his voice. It had been replaced by something quieter, something searching. He was treating you like an idiot, Nora said defensively, crossing her arms. I hate watching people get taken advantage of. I am the head of the most violent syndicate in this city, Arthur said, turning his face to her. I don't need you to protect me. I wasn't protecting you, Nora scoffed. I was doing my job. You pay me to read things. I read it. Arthur let out a sound that was half snort, half laugh. It was a rusty, unused sound. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed the scarred side of his face. Sit down, Nora, he said. Nora pulled out the chair next to him and sat. "Pour me a glass of wine," he ordered. Nora reached for the bottle of expensive red wine in the middle of the table. She poured a generous amount into a glass and slid it toward him, guiding his hand to the stem so he wouldn't knock it over. Arthur took a sip. He placed the glass on his knee. "Most people," Arthur began in a low voice, "look at me and see a ghost, a walking dead man. They wait for me to stumble, or they try to rob me because they think I can't see them doing it." And he turned his head, his blind eyes fixing on her face with uncanny precision. "Why don't you?" Nora looked at him. The brutal scar, the exhausted posture of his shoulders. "Because you're not a ghost, Arthur," she said simply. "You're just a blind guy with a terrible temper and a lot of paperwork. And honestly, I've dealt with worse." For the first time since he had lost his sight, Arthur Cornero smiled sincerely. "Pour yourself a glass too, Nora. We're going to be here a while." The transition from temporary worker to indispensable support did not happen overnight. It took place gradually. A moved coffee cup, a retied Windsor knot, a dead capo. AFO. In her second month, Nora's second-hand blazers were gone, replaced by sharp-cut wool coats paid for by the company account. She was no longer just reading ledgers, she was filtering them. She became the gatekeeper of the West Side Ghost, and the men in the syndicate hated it. They hated having to hand their reports over to a woman with blank eyes and an unforgiving detector. It was an ice-cold Thursday morning in November. The air in the warehouse in South Brooklyn tasted of salt, diesel fumes, and wet concrete. Arthur stood at the edge of loading dock number 4. The collar of his black cashmere coat turned up against the biting wind coming off the harbor. He had his hands buried deep in his pockets. He looked completely relaxed, a predator resting in the cold, right? Nora stood a foot and a half to his right. She held a clipboard. Her fingers were numb inside her leather gloves. Around them, in a loose, heavily armed perimeter, stood Vincent and 4 of Arthur's enforcers. They were waiting for a shipment from the Constanza family, a gesture of goodwill after the mess with Leon. A massive yellow forklift lowered a wooden crate onto the concrete floor with a heavy, hollow thud. The forklift backed away. His reversing alarm pierced the silence of the warehouse. 2 of the Constanza men stood by the crate. They looked nervous. "Open it," Arthur said. He didn't raise his voice over the wind. He didn't have to. One of the men grabbed a crowbar and wedged it under the wooden lid. He pulled until the nails squeaked and gave way. He pulled the lid back. "Describe it," Arthur murmured, leaning slightly toward Nora. Nora stepped forward. The men tensed, but Arthur raised a finger and froze them in place. Nora went to the open crate and looked inside. "It's filled with straw," Nora said in a calm voice. "Under the straw are wooden boxes, about the size of a shoebox. They are unmarked. Open one," Arthur ordered. The Constanza man with the crowbar looked at his partner, then reached in and pried the lid off one of the smaller boxes. He stepped back. Nora peered inside. "It's what you asked for?" "Weapon parts, disassembled. They look clean." "Do they smell clean?" Arthur asked. Nora blinked. "What?" "Metal has a smell. Oil has a smell," Arthur said. His blind eyes followed the sound of her footsteps as she shifted her weight. "Gunpowder has a smell. Do they smell fresh from the factory, or do they smell like they've been sitting in a damp basement for 3 years, gathering rust?" Nora leaned closer to the box. She took a breath. It smelled sharp, acrid. But under the thick layer of machine oil lay a faint, sour scent of mold and old dirt. She straightened up again. She looked at the 2 Constanza men. Their eyes were wide, silently begging her. "Just say, it's fine." "They smell like a basement," Nora said flatly. "There's pitting on the barrel of the top one. It's subtle, but it's rust. The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the lapping of the gray harbor water against the concrete piers outside. Arthur slowly pulled his hands from his pockets. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed, which was infinitely worse. "Carmine," Arthur said quietly, addressing the older of the two Constanzer men. "When I asked your boss for supplies, did I say I wanted the surplus junk you couldn't sell to street gangs in the 90s? "Mr. Cornero, I swear to God, we didn't pack the crates," Carmine stammered, raising his hands. "Vincent," Arthur interrupted, and Vincent drew a weapon. He simply stepped forward, grabbed Carmine by the lapel of his heavy jacket, and shoved him violently against the side of the wooden crate. The wood groaned under the impact. Carmine gasped. The air was knocked out of his lungs. "Take the crate back," Arthur said. His voice dropped to a low, deadly register. "Tell Saganza that the next time he tries to palm off rusty junk on me, I won't send the crate back. I'll send you back in it. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Carmine wheezed. "Understood?" Arthur turned on his heel. His cane tapped sharply against the concrete. "We're done here, Nora. Let's go." Nora followed him to the waiting town car. The wind whipped her hair into her face. Once they were inside, the warm, leather-scented interior of the car, the heavy doors shutting and shielding them from the noise of the harbor, Arthur let out a long breath. He rubbed his back. "You're shaking," he noted. Nora looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. "It's cold out there." "It's adrenaline," Arthur corrected. He turned his head toward her. "You could have lied. You saw how those men looked at you. You knew what would happen if you told the truth." "I don't work for them," Nora said, buckling her seatbelt. "I work for you. And honestly, if you start buying cheap weapons, the people shooting back at us might actually win. It's simple self-preservation." Arthur's corner of his mouth twitched. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver flask. He unscrewed the cap and held it out to her. "Drink," he said. Nora took it. She didn't wipe the rim. She took a sip of the alcohol inside. It burned like hellfire going down. A high-proof bourbon that immediately spread a knot of heat in her chest. She coughed and handed it back. Arthur took a drink himself. The silver flashed in the dim light of the car. "You're learning to see the ugly things," Arthur said softly, resting the flask on his knee. Most people close their eyes when it gets dark. You keep yours wide open." "Someone has to," Nora replied, looking out the tinted window at the gray city passing by. The penthouse was a tomb of glass and steel. It spanned the top 2 floors of a high-rise. A sprawling testament to Arthur's wealth and paranoia. The elevator required a keycard, a retinal scan, and a 4-digit code. Nora hated the apartment. It was too quiet. The air filtration system hummed with a sterile white noise that rang in her ears. It was 2:08 a.m. They had been working on the monthly books for a long time. The cost of running an empire never slept, and Arthur, insomnia was worse than usual. Nora sat on a massive, low, gray sofa in the living room. A laptop burned hot on her thighs. Arthur was in his study, a room without computers, but filled with filing cabinets, blind script documents, and a heavy wooden desk. He had been in there for an hour, supposedly on a call. Then came the crash. It was not a quiet sound. It was the violent, shattering explosion of heavy glass striking hardwood. Nora flinched. The laptop nearly slid from her lap. She sat frozen for 3 seconds, listening. There was no screaming, no scuffle, only heavy, gasping breath. She stood up, her bare feet silent on the expensive carpet, and walked to the study. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. The room smelled of scotch. A heavy crystal decanter lay in ruins on the floor. An amber-colored puddle seeped into the imported wood. Arthur stood in the center of the room. His tie was gone, his collar open, and his sleeves rolled up. His chest was heaving. Both hands were pressed firmly over his eyes. His fingers dug violently into his temples, as if he were trying to crush his own skull. He did not hear her enter. He was completely consumed by the war raging inside his head. "Stop!" he hissed through clenched teeth, his voice a raw, desperate croak. "Just stop." Nora did not move. She knew the medical term. Charles Bonnet syndrome. Visual hallucinations caused by the brain trying to compensate for sudden blindness. He had never spoken of it, but Vincent had quietly warned her. Sometimes the mind saw things that were not there, flashes of light, shapes. Sometimes the explosion that took his sight played on an endless loop in the darkness. Ugh. "Arthur," Nora said, her voice sharp and clear, breaking the silence. Arthur flinched violently. His hands fell from his face. The scarred side of his face was flushed, his milky eyes wide and panicked. He looked completely disoriented. He took a stumbling step backward. His heel caught on the edge of the heavy desk. "Who's there?" he demanded. His hand dropped instinctively to his waist, where a weapon usually sat. He wasn't wearing it. "It's me, Nora," she said. She did not soften her voice. She didn't coo at him. She spoke in the same flat, grounding tone she used when reading the port reports. "You are in your study. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. You just broke a very expensive decanter." Arthur's breathing was shallow and fast. "It won't go out. The light, it's burning." He reached up again and clawed at his scarred eye. Nora crossed the room in 3 quick steps. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed his wrists. Arthur was massive. He was built of muscle and violence and could have snapped her arms like twigs. The moment her hands clamped onto his wrists, his muscles locked. A low, warning growl built up in his chest. "Let me go," he commanded. A dangerous sharpness returned to his voice. "No," said Nora. She dug her fingers into the thick tendons of his wrists and forced away from his face. "You'll tear your skin open otherwise. Stop that." "You don't understand," he groaned, tugging at her grip. He was stronger and slowly pulled her arms upward. "It's burning, the room is burning." "No," said Nora, bracing herself against him. She stepped closer, invading his space and forcing him to focus on the physical reality of her presence. "There is no fire, Arthur. It is dark. It is quiet. Does the air smell? Does it smell like smoke?" Arthur stopped fighting her for a split second. His chest rose and fell. He inhaled sharply through his nose. He smelled the spilled scotch. He smelled the sterile ozone of the air purifier. He smelled the faint, lingering scent of cheap vanilla shampoo that Nora always used. "No," he whispered. The fight drained from his shoulders. "Right," said Nora. She didn't let go of his wrists, but she loosened her grip and slid her hands down until she held his large, calloused hands in hers. "Now feel this." "What is this?" She pressed his right hand flat against the heavy oak wood of his desk. Arthur's fingers twitched against the grain. "My desk." "And this," she guided his left hand to the brass lamp in the corner. The lamp, his voice lost its panicked sharpness and fell back into its normal, raspy register. "You are in your apartment. You are safe." "Your brain is just lying to you," said Nora in a calm voice. "Tell it to shut up." Arthur stood there, his hands anchored to the physical world by her instruction. His breathing slowly began to normalize. The terrible vulnerability on his face hardened, snapping back behind his usual mask of cold indifference. He pulled his hands from her path and took a deliberate step back. "I am fine," he said sternly, though his voice still held a slight tremor. "I know you are fine," Nora said, turning her back to him. She offered no pity. She did not try to embrace him. She walked to the cupboard, pulled out a small broom and dustpan, and returned to the shattered crystal on the floor. She knelt down and began to sweep up the glass. The rhythmic scratching and clinking filled the room. Arthur stood silently, listening to her work. "You didn't run away," Arthur said softly, breaking the silence. "I'm not cleaning up this glass alone in the dark," Nora replied, dumping the shards into the plastic bucket. "Besides, I've seen how you handle a ledger. Your paperwork is far more terrifying than your panic attacks." A long moment of silence passed. Then Arthur let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand through his dark hair. He stepped carefully around the wet spot on the rug and navigated back to his leather armchair. "Pour me a glass of water, Nora, and read me the numbers from the Bronx crew again." "Sure, boss." The betrayal didn't come with a warning. It never does. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, disguised as a routine drop-off. They were sitting in the back of Arthur's armored SUV. Vincent was driving. A heavily armed escort vehicle was in front of them, navigating the narrow, congested streets of the meatpacking district. Arthur had ordered a direct collection from a stubborn bookie who had missed 3 payments. It was meant to be a message. Nora sat next to Arthur, reading emails aloud from her phone. Arthur sat with his head leaned back against the leather headrest. His cane rested between his knees. "The contractor says the renovations at the new club will take another 3 weeks due to permit delays, douches," Nora read. "Tell him he has to, or I'll break his legs and use the permits as splints," Arthur replied without opening his eyes. "I'll rephrase that as deeply disappointed and expecting haste," Nora murmured. Her thumbs flew across the screen. Ahead of them, the escort vehicle suddenly braked hard. The heavy SUV jerked as Vincent slammed on the brakes a second later, throwing Nora forward against her seatbelt. The tires screeched on the asphalt. "What the hell is that?" shouted Vincent, shifting into park. Nora looked up. A massive, rusted garbage truck had pulled out of an alley, blocking the street entirely and trapping the escort vehicle. Before anyone could process the blockade, a black van smashed into the rear bumper of their SUV with a bone-shattering crash. They were boxed in. "Ambush!" roared Vincent, drawing his weapon. The air shattered. Gunfire erupted from rooftops and alleys, hammering against the SUV's armored glass. The noise was deafening, a relentless, jarring roar vibrating through the vehicle's metal frame. The reinforced windows developed spiderweb cracks under the impact of high-caliber rounds, turning opaque white. "Get down," bellowed Arthur. His hand shot out blindly to his left. He found Nora's shoulder and shoved her ruthlessly down toward the floor mats. Nora hit the floor hard. Her phone clattered away. Panic, cold and sharp, surged through her veins. The noise was unbearable. She smelled burnt gunpowder and hot metal. Up front, Vincent kicked his door open, using the armored frame as a shield while returning fire. "It's the Rossi crew. They have long guns on the roof." "Vincent, get us out of here." Arthur shouted over the noise. A heavy bullet smashed through the windshield, missing Vincent's head by inches and burying itself in the leather passenger seat. "I can't move the car." "The engine block is hit," Vincent yelled, firing 3 quick shots. He cursed violently. "I'm pinned down." "Boss, you have to move." "The passenger door is in a blind spot for the shooters on the left." Arthur didn't hesitate. He reached for his ankle and pulled out a sleek, matte black Glock. He racked the weapon with a single fluid motion, but as he sat up, he froze. He was in a metal box under heavy fire, and he was completely, utterly blind. He couldn't see the shooters. He couldn't see the escape route. For the first time since the explosion, Nora saw true, naked helplessness flicker across his face. He gripped the gun. His knuckles were white, his head darting back and forth, listening to the ricochets, unable to aim, unable to protect himself. He was trapped. Arthur yelled to Nora over the gunfire. He couldn't hear her. He was hyperventilating. The noise was overwhelming his remaining senses. Nora scrambled off the floor, ignoring the bullets pelting the roof. She grabbed his arm. "Arthur, listen to me," she screamed, pressing her mouth close to his ear. He flinched and turned his blind eyes toward her voice. "Nora, get down." "No, you need me," she shouted. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her voice was terrifyingly calm. Adrenaline wiped out the fear, leaving only cold mechanics behind. "Slide out of the passenger door now." Arthur did not argue. He moved with brutal efficiency. He threw his weight against the heavy door and pushed it open. He fell onto the dirty asphalt and pulled Nora behind the cover of the rear tire. Concrete dust rained down on them as bullets shredded the road inches away. "Where are they?" Arthur demanded, pressing his back against the tire, his weapon raised. Nora peered around the bumper, her eyes scanning the chaos. "Two on the fire escape opposite, second floor. One moving behind the garbage truck." "Range," Arthur commanded, his voice suddenly dead. Calm, the panic was gone. He had a job to finish. He just needed the data. "Fire escape is 12, Nora said, forcing her breathing to slow. "Height is 6 meters up." Arthur raised his weapon and braced his forearms on the hood of the car. "Give me the clock position." 2 o'clock high, Nora said. Arthur adjusted his aim slightly. 2 inches left, Nora corrected, watching the shooter lean over the railing. Arthur squeezed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The jarring explosions made Nora's ears ring. Across the street, the shooter on the fire escape jerked back. His rifle fell from his hands as he collapsed over the metal grating. "One down," Nora gasped, her eyes wide. "The second one is moving down the stairs." 3 o'clock. Ground level, 9 meters. Arthur shifted his stance and tracked the invisible geometry. She fed him. He moved like a machine, perfectly calibrated, waiting for the input. "Quetu." "He's behind a mailbox," Nora said. "Wait, he's leaning out now." Arthur fired twice. The man by the mailbox spun around and fell, clutching his shoulder. "Truck," Vincent shouted from the front of the vehicle. "They're advancing on foot." Nora looked to the left. 3 men were approaching from the alley, using the black van as cover. "Arthur, left side," Nora cried, grabbing his jacket and pulling him tight to the rear bumper. 9 o'clock, close, 6 meters. They're coming around the van. Arthur didn't aim high this time. He aimed low at the gap under the van. "Tell me when you see feet." Nora watched the gap. Boots appeared and shuffled quickly toward them. Now, Arthur opened fire from beneath the delivery van. Screams rang out again as the bullets found kneecaps and shins. 2 men went down hard. Their weapons clattered across the asphalt. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sharp, piercing howl of police cruisers cut through the city. The remaining shooters realized their ambush had failed. The gunfire subsided as they scrambled back into the alleys, leaving their wounded behind. Silence settled over the street again, broken only by the hissing of a punctured radiator and the distant sirens. Vincent slumped against the front tire, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but he was alive. "All clear," he called out in his voice. Nora slumped against the side of the SUV. Her legs gave out and she slid onto the asphalt. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her hands were covered in street grime. She couldn't stop trembling. Arthur slowly lowered his weapon. He ejected the magazine, caught it in his palm, and slammed a fresh one in from pure muscle memory. He holstered the gun. He turned his head to where Nora was sitting. He didn't ask if she was okay. He offered no empty words of comfort. He walked over, his boots crunching on broken glass, and crouched beside her. He reached out his hand. His hand hovered for a second before finding her shoulder. He let his hand slide upward. His fingers brushed the side of her neck, feeling the frantic, galloping pulse jumping beneath her skin. He left his hand there, a warm, heavy weight that anchored her to the ground. "You did well, Nora," Arthur said quietly. The roughness in his voice was completely free of his usual cruelty. "You did exactly what you had to do." Nora closed her eyes, leaned her head against the dented metal of the car, and let the reality of what had just happened wash over her. She had just directed a blind mob boss to shoot 3 people. She wasn't just reading ledgers anymore. She was writing them in blood. "You owe me a new phone," Nora whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. "I dropped it in the car." Arthur let out a quiet, genuine laugh that was completely out of place on the blood-soaked street. "I'll buy you the company," Arthur replied. He stood up and offered her his hand. Nora looked at his hand for a moment, then reached up and took it, letting the ghost of the West Side pull her from the rubble. The penthouse smelled of antiseptic, copper, and expensive scotch. Arthur sat shirtless on the edge of his kitchen island. A doctor, a quiet, pale man, who took cash and asked no questions, carefully pulled a shard of tempered glass from Arthur's left shoulder. Arthur did not flinch. He simply held a highball glass filled with an amber liquid. His knuckles were white, his blind eyes staring straight ahead. Nora stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city lights. She had washed her hands 3 times, but she could still feel the phantom grit of asphalt and gun oil under her fingernails. Her ears were still ringing, a high, thin whistle that refused to fade. The doctor finished the last stitch, cut the thread, and taped a gauze pad over the wound. "Keep it dry. I'll be back in 2 days to check for infection." "Take him out, Vincent," Arthur said in a flat voice. Vincent, wearing a butterfly bandage over his eyebrow, nodded and led the doctor to the private elevator. The heavy door slid shut, sealing the apartment in a heavy, suffocating silence. Arthur set his glass on the marble counter. The clink was loud in the empty room. "There is a duffel bag in the bottom drawer of my desk," Arthur said. He didn't turn his head. He spoke into the empty air between them. "It contains $200,000 in unmarked bills. Clean money. There's a passport in there, too. Blanco. You just need to paste in the photo." Nora turned away from the window. She crossed her arms and shivered slightly, despite the apartment's aggressive heating. "Are you firing me?" "I'm giving you a way out," Arthur corrected. He ran a hand over his face, careful to avoid the jagged scar. "You're a civilian, Nora. You read ledgers, you make coffee. You aren't supposed to call targets in a firefight with the Rossi family." "I did what I had to do," she said defensively. "We were pinned down, and you saved my life," Arthur said. He finally turned his head. His milky eyes found her general direction. The exhaustion etched into his features was profound. "But they saw you. They heard you. You're no longer just the temp. You're the boss says eyes. That makes you the most valuable target in this city." Nora walked slowly to the kitchen island. She saw his bruised ribs, the fresh bandage on his shoulder, the sprawling, violent tattoos that wound around his arms. He looked indestructible, but she knew exactly how fragile he was. She had felt his pulse against her fingertips just an hour ago. "I don't want the duffel bag, Arthur." "Don't be stupid," he snapped. A flash of his usual temper returned. "Rossi isn't going to stop. He knows my weakness now. He knows I can't aim a weapon without someone holding my hand." "I didn't hold your hand. I did my job." Nora stopped half a meter away from him. "And you aren't weak. You just need a better system. I am a good system." Arthur let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You are a 26-year-old girl who ate saltine crackers for dinner 3 months ago. You don't belong here." "Maybe not," Nora agreed simply. "But I'm not leaving, because if I leave, You'll hire some terrified kid from the agency who will bolt the moment a shot is fired, and you will die. And honestly, the pay here is too good. And I like the dental insurance. Arthur went perfectly still. He listened to her breathing. He listened to the steady, undisturbed rhythm of her heart. He reached out his hand. His large hand hovered in the space between them, searching. Nora didn't step back. She stepped forward and let his fingers graze her waist. He placed his hand around her lower back and gripped the fabric of her ruined blouse. Eve. He pulled her half a step closer. He didn't pull her into a kiss. He just pressed his forehead against her shoulder and exhaled a long, trembling breath. It was a terrifying surrender of control. The ghost of the West Side, leaning on his secretary, Lee. "If you stay," Arthur whispered, his voice muffled against her collarbone, "I will never be able to let you go. Do you understand that?" Nora placed her hand on the nape of his neck. Her fingers caught slightly in his dark hair. "I'll clear the cheap coffee off my desk by tomorrow morning, boss." The war with the Rossi family turned the city into a meat grinder over the next 3 weeks. Arthur's empire bled, but he struck back with ruthless, surgical precision. He no longer attended meetings in person. He operated from the penthouse, a spider in a web of burner phones and whispered reports. Nora was his filter, his strategist, and his eyes. She learned to read the hesitation in a captain's voice on the phone. She learned to spot the discrepancies in the protection money payments. She became untouchable. Vincent assigned her 2 shadows at all times, but a fortress is only as strong as its weakest guard. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. Nora was in the underground garage of the syndicate's main holding company, checking a stack of manifest documents in the back of the armored SUV. Her 2 guards were standing by the bumper, smoking. She didn't hear the struggle. She only heard the wet, sickening thud of a body hitting concrete, followed by a suppressed gunshot. Nora dropped the clipboard. She reached for the panic button, wired under the armrest, But before her fingers could find the plastic edge, the heavy door of the SUV was ripped open. A man in a wet trench coat leaned in. He had a brutal, flattened nose and a silenced pistol pointed directly at her face. "Don't scream," the man said. Nora looked past him. Her 2 guards lay on the ground in growing pools of dark blood. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. The ice-cold, cynical survival instinct that had kept her alive for so long took control. She slowly raised her hands. "Arthur will skin you alive," Nora said, her voice completely emotionless. The man grinned. "He has to find us in the dark first. Sweetheart, let's go." 20 minutes later, Arthur's private phone rang on the heavy oak desk in the penthouse. It was a specific ringtone, reserved for emergencies. Arthur, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped. He fumbled his way to the desk, picked up the receiver, and pressed it to his ear. He didn't speak. "Arthur Cornero," a voice purred on the other end. It was Dominic Rossi, the head of the rival family. "I hear you've been relying heavily on your administrative staff lately." Arthur's blood froze. The temperature in the room dropped. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight. "Where is she, Dominic?" Arthur asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was a hollow, dead whisper, like the sound of a grave opening. "She's having a great time at the old cold storage warehouse in the Bronx," Rossi boasted. "You know, the one where you used to hang my people from the meat hooks." Poetic. "Really?" "Come alone, Arthur. Just you, your cane, and your wallet. Sign over the docs, and maybe I'll let her keep her fingers." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Arthur said. "Bring a flashlight, blind man. It's dark in here." Rossi hung up. Arthur slowly placed the phone back on the cradle. He didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He went to his desk drawer, opened it, and pulled out 2 spare magazines for his Glock. He shoved them into his pockets. Vincent stormed into the room, his face pale, clutching a bleeding wound on his arm. "Boss, they have her." The guards in the garage were bought off. I just found them. I know, Arthur said. He walked past Vincent, his cane completely ignored, leaning against the desk. He didn't need it now. The floor plan of the penthouse was burned into his muscles. Boss, we need to mobilize the crew. We strike with everything we have. No, Arthur interrupted him. He stopped at the door. If we bring an army, Dominic will shoot her in the head before we storm the lobby. I'm going alone. Arthur, you can't do that. It's a trap. They want you stumbling around in there. They're going to execute you. Arthur turned his scarred face toward his second-in-command. His milky eyes were dead, but the aura radiating from the man was suffocatingly violent. Dominic Rossi thinks my blindness is a weakness, Arthur said softly. He thinks he's pulling me into the dark. A terrifying, jagged smile touched the corners of Arthur's mouth. He forgets that I live there. The abandoned meat processing plant smelled of rust, standing water, and old blood. It was a cavernous, sprawling labyrinth of steel corridors and heavy freezer doors. Nora was tied with zip ties to a metal chair in the middle of the main slaughter room. A single, blinding industrial halogen lamp was aimed directly at her, turning the rest of the huge space into a pitch-black void. Dominic Rossi stood at the edge of the light, flanked by 6 men with silenced, automatic rifles. Rossi looked at his watch. 10 minutes, Rossi muttered, and lit a cigarette. The ghost is running late. Maybe he tripped over a curb. His men snickered. Nora sat perfectly still. The plastic zip ties cut into her wrists, but she didn't fight them. She listened. The building groaned and dripped, but beneath the ambient noise, she heard it. The heavy crash of the main fuse box being ripped open in the corridor outside. He's not late, said Nora. Her voice cut through the damp air. He's just making himself comfortable. Before Rossi could answer, a massive, deafening click echoed through the facility. The halogen lamp went out. The emergency exit signs went dark. The building sank into absolute, suffocating, pitch-black darkness. No moonlight, no streetlights, total eclipse. Hey, what the hell? Rossi shouted, his voice suddenly colored with panic. Turn on the flashlights. Night vision. Put on the goggles. Several frantic clicks echoed in the dark as flashlights flickered on, but they were weak, cutting through the dusty air, like thin white lasers illuminating only small patches of rusted metal and concrete. Q2. They blinded themselves with their own beams, ruining any natural night vision their eyes were trying to develop. Then came the sound, a metallic grinding, heavy boots stepping softly on wet concrete. Coming from the catwalk above them. Up there. Fire, screamed Rossi. 3 rifles opened fire, shredding the metal catwalk. Sparks rained down in the darkness, illuminating brief strobe-like flashes of empty space. There was no one there. Twip, twip. 2 suppressed shots coughed from the floor 15 meters. To their right. 2 of Rossi's men fell. The sound of their bodies hitting the concrete was heavy and wet. The flashlights on their rifles clattered to the floor and rolled around aimlessly. He's on the floor. Spread out, shrieked Rossi, firing his own pistol blindly into the darkness. Panic was a virus, and Arthur was the carrier. In the light, they were trained killers. In the absolute darkness, they were prey. Arthur didn't need to see them. He could hear their gasping breath and the squeak of their rubber soles. He could smell the cheap cologne and the metallic scent of nervous sweat. He was a shadow, moving seamlessly through his own element. Twip. Another shot. Another body hit the floor. Nah. Shoot the girl, roared Rossi, realizing his leverage was his only way out. Kill her. Nora didn't wait to be a victim. She threw her body weight to the side. The metal chair tipped over with a loud crash, slamming her hard against the ice-cold concrete just as a hail of bullets tore through the space where her chest had been a second before. She lay on the floor, gasping for air. Her wrists screamed in pain. "Arthur?" she cried. 4 o'clock, 9 meters, heavy breathing. Arthur didn't need distance and elevation this time. He only needed the anchor of her voice. He lunged from the cover of a rusted meat hook. He didn't shoot. He was moving too fast. He grabbed the barrel of the nearest rifle and jerked it upward as it fired harmlessly into the ceiling. With his other hand, he plunged a combat knife straight into the shooter's throat. 4 down, 2 to go, plus Rossi. Where is he? The last 2 men screamed, swinging their flashlight beams wildly, catching nothing but dust particles and blood spatters. Arthur picked up a loose bolt from the floor and threw it across the room. He clattered loudly against a metal door. Both men turned toward the noise and fired blindly. Arthur stepped out of the darkness right behind them. He raised his Glock and fired twice. Thip, thip. The room went dead. The only sound was the dripping of water and Dominic, Rossi's panicked, hyperventilating breath. Rossi's flashlight beam trembled violently. He backed away, sweeping the light left and right and right. Arthur, wait! We can talk. We can negotiate about the territory." Arthur said nothing. Rossi backed into a concrete pillar. He turned around and shone the light. Arthur stood a meter away. The light hit Arthur's face. The milky dead eyes stared blankly straight ahead. The jagged scar looked demonic in the harsh white beam, but his weapon was raised and aimed with terrifying absolute precision directly at the center of Rossi's forehead. "You brought me into the dark, Dominic," Arthur whispered. His voice was calm, undisturbed, the voice of a true apex predator. "But the darkness belongs to me." Arthur pulled the trigger. The flashlight fell to the floor, rolled away, and came to a stop against a wall, where it cast long, eerie shadows across the slaughterhouse floor. Arthur stood still for a moment and listened. He waited for a heartbeat, 8, scrape of a boot, a shift in weight, nothing. The threats were neutralized. He holstered his weapon. "Nora, over here!" she rasped from the floor. Arthur walked toward her voice, his steps precise and confident. He didn't stumble. He dropped to his knees beside the overturned chair. He found her shoulder in the dark. His hands moved quickly down her arms to the zip ties cutting into her wrists. He pulled a switchblade from his pocket, flipped it open skillfully, and slid the cold steel under the plastic, snapping the bonds. Nora gasped, pulling her arms forward and rubbing her bruised wrists. She pushed herself into a sitting position. Arthur stayed on his knees. He reached out. His hands found her face. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, feeling for cuts, tracing her jawline to ensure she was whole. His touch was frantic, free of all his usual cold restraint. "Are you hit?" he asked in a rough voice. "No," Nora breathed. "I'm fine. I'm okay." Arthur exhaled. He let his forehead drop until it rested against hers. In the pitch-black room, surrounded by the bodies of their enemies, they sat on the freezing concrete, sharing the same air. "I told you," Nora whispered. A faint, cynical smile touched her lips even though he couldn't see it. "You really need a better security system." Arthur let out a low, husky laugh. He wrapped his arms around her, pulled her tight against his chest, and buried his face in her hair. "You are the only system I need," he said. 6 months later, the waiting room outside the corner office was empty. The temp agency had long since stopped sending girls. Inside the office, the heavy blackout curtains were drawn back, only a centimeter, letting a single, sharp streak of afternoon sunlight fall across the mahogany desk. Nora sat on the edge of the desk, legs crossed, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that matched the boss's of Assistent. She was reading the weekly earnings from the docks. The numbers had risen by 20%. Arthur sat in his leather chair, a cup of black coffee right where it belonged on the right side of the phone. He listened, his face relaxed, the terrifying aura of the ghost, replaced by something grounded, something frighteningly sharp. He didn't need eyes to see the empire they were building. He had her, and everyone in the city knew it. If you wanted to speak to the boss, you had to survive the woman who wasn't afraid of the dark. If you enjoyed this intense, action-packed finale between Arthur and Nora, then do us a huge favor and hit that like button. We pour our heart and soul into these grounded, dark mafia romances, and your support means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Who was your favorite character in this story? Let us know in the comments below.